Good afternoon, guys, and wherever you are in the world, I'm really excited about today's podcast. From Louisiana, I have Jim DuBos, and he is going to talk to the audience all about how to help business owners launch, scale, and exit their companies. I'm really excited. He's got a lot of experience and wisdom, and excited to welcome him to the show. So, Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to hopefully sharing some words of wisdom with your audience.
Well, excellent. Well, introduce yourself and how you got to be doing what you're doing.
So the short version I can give you is I'm a 35-year entrepreneur. I'm almost 60 today, but I've had 10 companies and I've had the blessing to exit 7 of those companies through formal mergers and acquisitions. Most of the companies were B2B, a couple were B2C companies. And what I did in my last transaction, it was in 2022, is I spent a minute thinking about what were the things that made my companies valuable to buyers, and built a set of attributes, I'll call it, that really translated into real asset value for potential buyers. And then the second element was, because my last company was probably my most fulfilling personally. And I asked myself some very, self-reflective questions. What were those things that made it so enjoyable? And I distilled it down to some principles that ended up driving me to write an ebook called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Fulfillment. And it was really to help entrepreneurs, because we know that this is hard. Right? This entrepreneurship is a hard journey. It's not a get rich quick scheme. And so how do you find fulfillment every day in operating your companies, and how do you operate them regardless of whether or not you want to sell or not, with attributes in mind that give you options, quite frankly, and freedom from your business? So that's at a high level, that's who I am and what I'm doing.
Interesting. So one thing when I love, again, this podcast is for businesses to showcase and what are your client avatar, and kind of describe it. What are they aspiring to? What are they running away from? What are they frustrated with to come and work with you?
So if I look at my client journeys, right, I can start with the launch journey, and the launch journey is really to help a beginning entrepreneur, a first-time entrepreneur. I'm not speaking necessarily about young people, because there are many first-time entrepreneurs that are older in life. It's really just to make sure that they contemplate certain characteristics about the business. And I'll say that if you can't see clearly to your first $1 million, you need to stop and ask yourself why. Okay, because you're in my eyes, you're probably not being realistic with the ability for the business to be able to be successful. And it's really teaching them a methodology of what I like to call 60-day sprints, so that they get to a place of out of the launch phase and into the stability phase of their business as quickly as possible. And then when we get into the scale journey is really taking an individual business owner that has gotten into stability, feels they have consistency in their revenue. We run them through a self-scoring of their business against the 15 attributes that I call the exit-ready method. We take that score and then we develop a personalized plan of growth, not scale yet, but just growth against the business. And then once they've got success in growing the business, okay, then we come back and say, okay, now we want to look at scale. Let's identify the products and services that are driving real margin into your business. And how do we drive this scale component where we don't have this alignment between revenue and expense? Okay. And so that's that's that middle journey, if you will. And then the exit journey is for the entrepreneur who is thinking about a transition of some sort. It might be a legacy transition from one generation to another. It could be a outright sale of a business, or it might be an employee-owned transaction. Well, all of those things have certain characteristics. And so what I've done is built a programmatic method of a 90-day journey with an entrepreneur to prepare them for a potential transaction in their business. And so that's, at a high level, regardless of the journey of the entrepreneur, it gives them that opportunity to engage with me. I can't guarantee anybody's success, but what I can do is give you the benefit of 35 years of success and scar tissue, quite frankly, of things that have worked for me in the past and that seem to work for other entrepreneurs as well. So
Interesting. That's a really fascinating discussion. And so you and me, we talked about earlier in the green room about designing your business with the end goal of what is it saleable. A lot of listeners and viewers of the podcast, they're coaches or consultants, public speakers, thought leaders. What are they doing wrong that makes their business non-saleable?
I don't know that, I don't know that they're necessarily doing anything wrong, right? I think sometimes I'm shocked, Christopher, is the best way I can say this. I'm shocked at how much time entrepreneurs will spend working in the business, but not considering it as an asset with value in the future. And to me, it's stunning, right? And so I look and I go, you don't have a asset, you have a job. Okay. And so what I try to do is counsel, and in many cases I'm talking to a business coach who has a client and they're trying to give them good counsel. And so what I did when I built the 15 attributes, the attributes are the things that the coaches can work with their clients on, right, based upon the outcome of the scoring. And then when they're ready to begin thinking about a transaction, okay, what are the steps associated with that? But to me, I'm just stunned at how much time entrepreneurs will spend working, in the business, but never consider that it's actually an asset that if you built it in a particular way, you'd have exit value as well. And I think certainly in some generations, we have a tendency to have a negative connotation about the sale of a business. It's almost it's interesting in some dialogue you have, it's like, oh, are you're letting people down in some way? Are you turning your back on your employees or on your customers? And that's just not simply the case. And that's not been my own personal experiences. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs think, well, if I leave the business, it's going to fall apart. Well, if your business is totally dependent upon you, you don't have a sellable business to begin with. Okay. But egotistically, I would tell you that you should be building the business so that it is not dependent upon you. Through the art of delegation and hiring the right employees, you're able to free yourself from the day-to-day job that you have and actually transition into ownership, right? And running the business without having it be so owner dependent.
Yeah. So we'll talk about what you're alluding to is businesses trapping their owners, and what are early signs that a business is becoming a trap instead of a trope?
Time is the most valuable asset we have. And one of the things that I like to do with entrepreneurs who are, I'll say they do the scoring assessment, and maybe they don't score particularly well in certain areas. One of the first things I like to have them do is to do a time log. Write down every 15 to 30 minutes, what are you spending time on during the day? And look at it over a course of, a week. When you come back and evaluate it, you ask yourself the question, are these really the priorities that you should have in your business? Are these the priorities, right? And when you compare that to an actual kind of objective score of preparing your business to be exit ready, sometimes it's really, really telling that you're not working on the most important things in the business, right? And so that's something that I like to do in those early stages with the entrepreneurs.
Interesting. Talk about exiting, because and you founded 10 companies, exited 7.
Right.
What is, how should a business owner or entrepreneur be thinking of like you mentioned, employee versus like an acquisition or a public offering? How do you determine that?
So look, I've had the experience in some of my exits where I've sold a company to a publicly traded company and kind of went through I'll say stock option vesting, that type of an approach. I've had the kind of the more traditional approach of having a new buyer, right? A new ownership community own the company. And it's one of the things that I learned in my review was that they all tend to value the same things. Okay. Owner dependency is the first red flag that's going to throw up, right? If a business cannot survive with the owner exiting, you got a real problem in the asset. The core consideration is, have you hired well, and do you have a second line management team to take the business forward? Because I'd say in virtually all of the companies that I've sold, all of the line management employees outside of ownership all remained with the companies and continued to execute their responsibilities in the business. 99% of them did. And so that told me that buyers really value strong management structure, processes, systems, delegating well, right? So those are the things that when you're thinking about your business and you're looking at that time log and saying, what am I spending my time on? Well, did I delegate well? Do I have people in place who can execute those things so that then you can build and grow the business, going forward? That's what buyers, that's what they value.
What about someone that's like, I'll never sell, I don't need to think about this?
So look, that's a great question. I had a really good friend who had I'm going to just call it a health moment. Okay. Had a health moment, and he had, fortunately, he and I were good friends, and he had built his business, using a lot of the attributes that I have in the exit ready method. And when his health moment came and he had to step away, he didn't have an owner dependent business. He had management, he had structure, he had processes. People knew how to execute the business. And so he didn't lose the business. He was able to take a step. He had the freedom. I'm going to use that word. He had the freedom to step away from the business, deal with his, personal health concern, then come back to a healthy business with employees that were thrilled that he was obviously well, and customers who were thrilled that he was well, but he was also relieved of the stress and burden of having to think about and worry about his business while he was dealing with his personal health issue. So to me, it's not about whether or not you want to sell your company. It's about having the freedom and options when unexpected things happen. Then you are able to sustain yourself through that moment.
Is a company's value only determined by its revenue?
No, it's obviously a driver, right? I'll give you a concrete example. I gave this example the other day in a talk. Have a friend who has been, a hairstylist, had a hair salon for a long time. And she and I, began talking about her business a little bit. And I said, well, why don't you sell a membership to your hair salon? You have the same people coming in, every month, every 6 weeks, whatever, sell a membership. And so little by little, we implemented a membership structure, and she got her membership numbers to the point, her revenue numbers to the point where it was 100% of her previous average revenue. Okay. But only 65% of her calendar was booked. And so what was interesting was it freed up a percentage of her point of service walk-in calendar where she could actually drive more revenue into the business. Now, that business is inherently more valuable because it's recurring. She got all of her memberships on a 12-month agreement, and they just churn every month, just like I call it the Netflix of hair, right? It's just recurring every month. And so I always tell entrepreneurs, look, it's not about revenue, but it's the way that the revenue gets demonstrated across months and years. Mm-hmm. Do I have recurring customers? Is the revenue one time versus some form of a membership? Another example I could give you would be, I was working with a startup, and they said, this particular service offer is going to be $15,000 to $20,000. I said, why do you want to sell it that way? And they said, well, we need the cash. I said, okay. I said, but what if you sold that for $750 a month over 3 years? I said, number one, you eliminate the barrier of entry for a customer to spend $20,000 with you, right? And you get a recurring revenue stream. And if the deliverables are clear and they're going to get the same deliverables, I promise you, they're going to want to spend $750 a month, not $20,000 up front. Okay. And so the entrepreneur's wheel kind of spun a little bit like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Right. And so really what I generally tell entrepreneurs is look at the top 4 or 5 products and services that are really driving revenue and margin. Let's use that word, and margin into your business, and ask yourself, how do I turn these, if these are one-time revenue moments, how do I turn these into recurring revenue moments? Because that's inherently more valuable. The multipliers that are applied to those portions of the revenue stream in your business, because they typically are higher margin, are significantly different than one-time, components. The other value indicators are the industry that you're in. So what's happening in the industry trend, the geography that you're operating in is obviously a factor. Any type of IP, so I go through that when I go through the self-scoring of the attributes. I kind of highlight those areas of the business that all drive value. But obviously, no buyer wants to have a company that revenue's decreasing, right? They want to see growth. They want to see scale. And so obviously it's a component, but it is important to ask, is it repeatable, right? That repeatable nature of that business is very important to buyers.
Interesting. Yeah. So, kind of round it out, if you had to do it all over again and just zero money, zero connections, what should entrepreneurs be focusing on?
Well, look, my own experience was always that I needed to render value to the market that I was trying to serve. And my own experience, particularly in B2B companies, is that B2B businesses, they basically decide to spend money on one of 3 reasons: to make money, to save money, or to mitigate a risk. And if your solution doesn't meet one of those 3 characteristics, if you can't clearly articulate it, guess what? They're not going to buy it. And so I think it's very important that you evaluate the product and or service that you're bringing to the market. Seth Godin had, a great expression: design your products and service around what the customer wants, right? And so really understanding the customer value, what it is they want, and then creating the product and service around that is really the key. And to me, my own experience was that you need to solve problems. Your solution, whatever you're bringing to the market, needs to solve a problem. Because if it inherently doesn't meet one of those 3 objectives, or it doesn't clearly solve a problem, more than likely they're not going to spend the money. In B2C, it's a little different. A B2C, typically we value our time. We're looking at entertainment as a component of that. And so when you're designing services for a B2C customer community, again, you have to ask, well, why would they spend money on this product or service? Does it add value? Does it give them time back? Is it an entertainment component, right? Health, education, entertainment, these areas of business, you need to really understand the buyer and ask yourself, are they really willing to spend this money, on that? And so that's how I would approach bringing any business to market, is really having a clear value proposition, whether it be to B2B or B2C.
Interesting. How can people connect with you and reach out to you and learn from you?
Well, my website is dubos.me, DUBOS.me. You can email me at entrepreneurship@dubos.me. Lands right in my inbox, and I'm happy to help. There's quite a few free sets of material on the website, regardless of the customer journey you're on. And I love to help both business owners and coaches. And so if there's coaches out there that want, and need help with a particular situation, I'm happy to work with coaches as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and really interesting discussion.
Thank you, Chris.